folks. This is Wiley Oakley, roaming man of the Great Smoky Mountain.
Okay, another time he was walking, and this is going to be in the fall. It's October, and the leaves are starting to turn loose from the trees. Every single leaf seems to say, "Goodbye, Roman man of the mountains. I'm leaving the great big trees. I'm going now to spend winter on the earth. I'm now to become food for other trees." Another day, as it was fall, he wrote, "As I stood on the mountain, I was watching the leaves, and this thought came to me. It was as if each leaf was a praying. They were saying, 'Now it is fall. Now I lay me down to sleep and pray the Lord my soul to keep.'" Knowing that next year the leaves will live again in all their glory, for that is how God has made it. It is His way. Today I saw a tree in the Smokies. It was so beautiful. Its colors was red and blue. Red and yellow. Well, it couldn't be beat. This is a tree with 3 different leaves. So what was he talking about? Sassafras. That's right. It's a tree of strange mystery. And it makes me wonder and wonder, why is it that I love this tree so much? He said, "I walk up and down these hills, and I must tell you, I am a man that loves trees." Well, he was always watching, studying, wondering about something. Even if he was sitting in his house, looking out a window, or sitting on a porch, he said, "The Smokies is a lifetime study for me." Well, not everybody felt that way like Wiley. So one day, he was sitting around in the kitchen, and he happened to notice that there was a spider web hanging from the rafters. And so he just watched, and he saw this great big, like a horsefly, go into that spider. And as soon as it did, that spider immediately went to work. That much, much smaller spider went to work and started spinning and tying up that fly. And he was so amazed at that little spider's determination. And then he says, and then Mrs. Roman, she comes into the kitchen and she takes her fly swatter and she starts swatting things away, and she knocks that spider and she knocks that fly all to pieces. And she said, "Wiley, what are you doing?" She says, "I've been wondering what you've been doing, sitting here in the kitchen. Why aren't you helping me?" And he said, "Well, I've been watching this spider and this fly." And I'm sure that Mrs. Roman had to do a lot of wondering too. He says, "I've been watching this, and I thought, what made this spider, this little spider, be the victor over that great big fly?" And he said, "Mrs. Roman, it was nothing more than strong will and sheer determination." And that's what we need too. And so he would learn about life through the very, very common, everyday things in nature. And after I read his books, and every once in a while I'll go through after a couple of years and reread them, and I really begin to think about how much I miss every day. Going a little too quick and not seeing a lot of things. I'm probably more like Mrs. Roman, don't say that. No. At least hopefully we don't have spider webs in the house. Okay. And Wiley was a very, very honest man. So honest that when he would be leading groups and telling stories or performing, he always wanted to make sure that his audience always knew the difference between one of his true stories and one of his false ones. So right from the get-go, when he would lead a hike or begin a presentation, he'd always say, "Folks, I'm known for telling two types of stories, true and false. But let me tell you, when I tell you a whopper, I'll always give out a little yodel so that you can know the difference." And one evening at a performance, he said, "I'm going to show you the difference between a true story and a whopper." So he told his audience, he said, "You know, last Sunday night, Miss Roman, she had bought us a watermelon. And it was such a good watermelon." He said, "Yum, yum, boy, did I eat." That's the way Wiley would just talk. He said, "I got on the scale to see how much I weighed. I weighed 178 pounds. Oh my, I was scared. This is far too much for a man my size, 5'3", and all my life only ran 137 to 148. Now, 178. No wonder I tell Mrs. Roman every morning I can jump out of my pants. They're just too little. Well, I was once 36, now it's 40, and after this watermelon tonight, it'll be 42. And then he told his audience, "I sure wish I could yodel. But I can't, because that is true." And then he said, "Now I'm going to give you an example of a whopper." He said, "You know, I knew this family years and years ago. Well, they lived way back in the sticks, and they had never ever seen a car. Well, when the first Ford Model T came by their place, you know what they did? They got their dog to go sick it. And they said, 'You go and you find out what kind of critter that is. Check out those tracks.'" He said, "Now, folks, I'm going to yodel." And so that's how you would tell the difference. Okay. Wiley was a very caring, a very compassionate man. And how many of you read, let me just ask, how many have read his book, Roman and Reston? Okay. That's very few. Even if you check it out at a library, you can get it at the National Park Visitor Center. It's very worthwhile to read, but so many times he expresses all of his emotions, and he said, "I cried and I cried," or "I was so sad, I was brokenhearted," by the things that he would see just around him in nature. And I want to just tell one story because I think it gives a good example of this. One day, Wiley was out hunting, and he noticed this raccoon, and he felt sort of sorry for it. He could tell that something was wrong, and that there was no way that poor little fellow was trying to get up a tree, but there is no way he was going to make it. So Wiley picked him up, and he looked very closely, and he could see that something was wrong with his back leg. Maybe it was broken or something. So Wiley thought, he says, "I can't just leave him. I've got to do something for this coon." So he takes out his knife and he breaks off a few little twigs, and he makes a little splint, okay? And he's got some string, and he puts it around there. And so I thought, you know what? I bet this coon is probably a little hungry. So he said, "Poor coon." That's what he always called him. "Poor coon." He said, "I'm going to go down to the creek. I'm going to catch a few salamanders for you, and then I'll bring them back and I'll give them to you to eat." So he did that. Well, wasn't about to leave him yet. He thinks, this coon is out here, and he can't, run up a tree. He's not very fast. He needs some protection. So he looks around, and he sees a great big chestnut tree, and there's a hollow hole in it. And so he puts poor coon in that hole for safekeeping. And he says, "Poor coon, I'll be back tomorrow and I'll check on you. Now, for Wiley to get back to that spot, it was 3 miles each way from his house. But he comes back and he checks on Coon, and Coon whispers. And he says, Coon must be hungry, so I'll go down and get him some more salamanders. So he does this every day for a couple weeks. Finally, he lets several days go by and a week or so go by. And now it's a month later and he comes back and he starts calling. Poor Coon, crippled Coon, where are you? Because he wasn't in his tree. And all of a sudden he hears a noise and he looks up and he says, poor Coon, you're up in a tree. You must be feeling a lot better. And so he was so glad that he had done something to help that Coon. So he let weeks go by, and all of a sudden it was now late summer. And he thought, it's been a long time since I went to visit poor Coon. I'm going to go by that way today. And he started calling for him. And he says, poor Coon, are you around? And poor Coon, Mama Coon now, comes down the tree, and behind her are 3 baby Coon. And Wiley's first thought is, oh, poor Coon, now I gotta go back to the creek and I got 4 mouths to feed. Back for more salamanders. Well, he was happy to see that family. A couple nights later, he was laying awake. It was at night, and there was a very, very bad, horrible high windstorm up in the Smokies, up in the mountains. And he told Mrs. Roman, he says, I cannot sleep. I am so worried about poor Coon and her babies. He said, as soon as it's daylight, I'm going to get out there in the woods, and I'm going to go checking on him. So at daylight, that's exactly what he did. And he went out to the chestnut tree. And sure enough, as he had suspected could have happened, another great big tree fell down on the chestnut tree. And there he saw, crushed to death, Mama Coon and all 3 babies. He says, I sat down and I cried and I cried. He said, there was no end to my brokenness and my sadness. And so he was always full of compassion. Wiley was nothing if not resourceful. Okay? I'll give an example of this, In the 40s, well, we already had a national park, and they were having a problem with this one particular bear because he was going very close into some of the farm fields and the areas where there was livestock, there were hogs, and he had already killed several cows. He had also got into some beehives and done a lot of damage. And so the park officials, the wildlife officials, were asked if they could not hunt or track this bear. They even brought in professionals from the wildlife department, and this outlawed broom kept eluding them. And so they finally, almost in desperation, said, well, why don't we go to the mountain man, the rodent man of the mountains, and see what he should or would do. And he said, no problem. So he got one of his good hunting buddies, and he said, we know what to do. Let's get us a wooden bucket. We're going to fill it up with moonshine. And then we'll also fill it up with some wild sourwood honey. Mix it really good, and we'll just keep it right next to the beehives. Well, they waited, and about 2 days later, Wiley and his good friend came back, and they saw that the honey bucket was completely dry. Not anything left. So they decided, well, look, there's the trail. And they began to follow this very uneven in and out bare trail. They noticed it went past the cornfield, down the hill, and sure enough, there, drunk as a fool, was this bear. So he let the park know, and they could just go pick it up. But he was always resourceful. But the last thing I want to say about Wiley Oakley was that he was a man of great, great faith. And when he walked these mountains, it always drew him back to his Creator, his Lord. And he felt so close to God when he was walking in these mountains. Now today we often see the phrase, God is painting in the mountains, or God is painting the mountains. But Wiley, when he wrote this book, that is what he entitled that. He used it way before anybody else was. He said, God is painting in the mountains. As I walked slowly down the trail, I wondered, what kind of God could make so many different mountains, trees, and plants? As I walk these mountains, I see God is painting in the mountain. He paints in the sunlight. He paints in the spring, in the autumn, in the foothills. He's painting in the forest, in the brightness of the morning, and in the glory of sunset. Made for us in wondrous wisdom to inspire in every soul that something is planned in nature's kingdom, and it's greater than what we know. But God knows it all. But still, with all God's painting and all God's pictures, all its glory, I wonder how many hearts surrender to this Maker. I am a man that roams in mountains, not made by human hands. At the age of 64, Wiley would die after a long battle with cancer. But before this, he asked God for just one more day in the mountains, one day by himself. And he said he wanted to go to a favorite spot where there was a very, very large rock and a creek. When he got to that spot, Wiley started to cry, and he prayed. He said, I know my boyhood days are gone. My hair has now turned to silver. He found the spot near the large rock, and when he bowed down, he placed some smaller rocks on the big rock. He said, I must pay tribute in honor to my King of Kings and my Lord of Lords. As I wandered through the woods toward home, knowing the day would soon be gone, I thought, Lord, how I wished that I could say something to help someone to Christ, to make peace with God while it's day, for the sun is bending low and time waits for no one. I'm going to close with just a couple testimonies that the family was given when Wiley Oakley died. He had a following of people, even in Germany and England, Canada, and all across the United States. He so embodied the mountains and the spirit of the mountain people. Many testimonials came, and I just want to read a couple. One family said, a trip to the Smokies was not complete without a visit with Wiley Oakley. Wiley Oakley was a beautiful character. One of the nicest things about the Smokies was Wiley Oakley. Wiley Oakley's passing is a great personal loss. I recall the reverence in his voice when he would tell stories about the ways of nature, the twinkle in his eye when he told a tall tale, and the chuckle he had after he yodeled. I saw the kindness and gentleness in him and his relationships, even with strangers. There was always a dignity and a humility in Wiley's philosophy of life. He was truly a man of God, the Roman man of the mountains. Close to his death, a lady had said to him, "Wiley, I sure wish you would have written more books like Roman and Rustic." He said, "Oh no, it's too hard for me to get up these mountain trails. If I'd had to write any more, I'd have had to call it Puffin' and Blowin'." But I wanted to close with saying, today, so many people come to the Smokies to see attractions that are in the mountains, but have nothing of the mountains. And there's such a clear distinction. How when people came in Wiley's time, they were so drawn by a particular family, a person that so endeared them and fleshed out for them the spirit of these mountains. And it could have been the Maples, it could have been the Connors, it could have been the Oakles, a family they met out, where they stayed at a cabin, or in the arts and craft community, or anything like that. But it kept drawing them over and over again back to the mountains. They loved these mountains because of the people, because of the relationships. It wasn't just a place to go to see an attraction. And it made me sort of sorrow for what has been in the past. But it also made me see how we must encourage others to be more and more like Wiley Oakley and hold on to the stories and the people of the mountains that truly made this area unique and different from any other place. Thank you.
Wiley Oakley roamed the Smoky Mountains, even as a very small boy. The mountains always brought him a special kind of joy. The death of Wiley's mother caused him to climb the mountains high. While on the mountaintop he felt closer to his mother up in the sky. Wiley also felt closer to God in his Smoky Mountain so dear. He could see beauties of nature every day, whether cloudy or clear. He loved the beauty of the mountains, rocks, streams, shrubs, and trees. He was so happy if in his face he could feel the mountain breeze. Wiley Oakley